Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Ian here, and today I'm going to show you guys how to create a more advanced verification system. It does require you to know a bit of Express.js because we are going to be using Express to set up a web server, and those users are going to be able to access some URL, and once they access the URL, they're going to get a token, and they're going to take that token, send it back to the bot, and then once they do that, if it's the correct token, like if they enter a correct token, they're going to be authorized on our server. So I'm going to show you how it works. So we're going to go over to my server. So you're going to get a DM. Okay. Now, obviously on my server, I have a welcome channel. Okay. This is where all the guests should be at. Obviously there are different types of verification systems, but of course we're making a bit more advanced one. So you're going to see, hello, Sty, welcome to test, please visit. And you're going to get this really long ass link. Okay. So we're going to click on this, and it's going to bring us to the web page, and it's going to give us some JSON, right? It's going to say token maps to this hash string. So you close it, and it's going to say, please enter the code you received. We're going to enter that in, and it's going to say that you are not authorized, and then you're going to see that we have access to all the channels. Okay, so obviously it works easily, but it's going to be a little bit more advanced because just the way we write it is going to be a little bit more advanced. Okay. So yeah, let's go ahead and show you the permissions on the server real quick, because it's important that you guys understand how to actually get this set up. So I'm on my server right over here, and you can see that I have a bunch of other channels. I have this category over here. So right now, welcome channel, you don't really need the welcome channel, but obviously, you know, if you're going to hide every other channel, you want to provide some channel where the user can see, and then you're going to tell them to follow the instructions provided by the bot and DM. You can provide rules and stuff, just whatever you want. That's pretty much going to be it. So for the welcome channel, you want to make sure that everyone, the permissions are left alone, because everyone should be able to, like every guest should be able to see it. Okay, and once they're given the role, right? So you want to make sure you also have a role that every user is going to be given once they're authorized. Okay, because that role means that they follow the instructions and they're authorized. You want to make sure that read messages is set to off, because obviously once they're authorized, you don't want the members able to access the guest channel. Okay, so now once they're authorized, it should unlock all of these channels for them. Okay, so if you look at general, so I have a category, and the permissions are pretty simple. Okay, so for everyone, I have all the permissions disabled, but the important permissions that you want to make sure that are set off is read text channels and see voice channels, as well as send messages. Okay, and for member, we just have it to read text channels and see voice channels. Send messages, they can also send messages, and a bunch of other permissions are not touched. Of course, you can play around with it until it fits your needs. But read text channels and see voice channels, as well as send messages, are important permissions that the member role must have. Okay, so let's just exit this. So you can pretty much see that it's pretty straightforward. And of course, if you have other categories, you want to make sure you have permissions set for those as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and just let's go ahead and actually start writing this this bot. So I'm gonna go ahead and just clear this up real quick. And I'm going to go ahead and say emitter auth discord. Okay, and we're going to go, actually, hold on. I'm going to call it emitter discord discord auth. If I can type. So let's go ahead and see the into there and just clear it. I'm going to open my text editor. Okay, so this is going to be like I said, this is not a beginner tutorial. It's a little bit more advanced, so you do need to make sure that you know what you're doing with JavaScript at least. But don't worry, I will be explaining everything as we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to first initialize my repository with a package.json file. So to do npm init-y, that's going to give us the package.json file. And we're going to install a couple of dependencies. We're going to install Discord.js. We're going to install Express. And I think that should be it. Okay. And I might show you guys how to deploy this to Heroku. I'll probably do it in like a different video, but for now I just want to focus on the verification system first. Okay, so we have Express and we have Discord. Okay, so Discord.js is obviously going to be used to interact with the Discord API. Express is a web framework. We're going to be using this to pretty much set up endpoints for our users to visit. Okay, because obviously, if you look at the link over here, This link is just some random like hashing, but this link though is going to be different for every single user. Okay, because you don't want every single user to go to the same link. Okay, and I'll explain why in just a sec. Okay, so let me just go and zoom in a little bit. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and create a new folder called source. And I'm gonna go ahead and actually put my bot.js file inside this source folder. Okay, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set up a script right over here. We're gonna set up two scripts. One, we're gonna set up the start script, because if you're deploying on Heroku or any other platform, they're gonna look inside this package.json file. Okay, and they're gonna make sure that they have the start script, which is basically going to start our application for us, which is what Heroku looks for. We're gonna set up a dev script. So this is just going to work for only development mode. So for development, I'm using node mod. Okay, but you can just use node if you want, like the node node command if you want to. And that's pretty much it for our scripts. So now I can go over to our bot.js file. I can go ahead and require the discord.js library. I can whoops. Did not mean to do that. Discord.client. And then I can go ahead and actually there's one more module that I want to install. It's .env. The reason why I'm installing that is so I can set up environment variables. Okay, because obviously I don't want to, because I mean you could use a config.json file, but I'd rather just use a .env file, because when we deploy to Heroku or like any other platform, we can just directly reference the environment variable using by referencing the process object. But over here I have two variables. I have a bot_token variable, and that's literally going to be my bot token, and then I have a port variable, which is the port that we're going to use for our web server. Okay, so but I will change that later on though. I'm going to explain something later on about the port, so pay attention to that. So I can log my bot in by referencing the environment variable bot_token. Okay, but before we do that, we need to make sure we require the .env module and then call the config function. So this is going to load all of the variables from .env. Okay, note that this will not override any environment variable that you already have set. So you want to make sure that if you have environment variables set on your system, that it's not the same name as this. Otherwise, it's going to reference that actual environment variable on your system first. Okay. So now we can log our bot in just by referencing that environment variable, and then we can just go ahead and say client on, ready. We're going to go ahead and just do a simple console.log, and we'll do client.user.tag has logged in. And you're going to see if I do npm run dev, the test script that we wrote, test autobot has logged in. Okay, but right now it doesn't do anything though. Okay, awesome. All right, so we're not going to be handling the message events because we're not going to be doing anything with messages. This is only going to be authorization bot. So the way it works is we need to join the server. Okay, and when we first join the server, we're going to be a guest, or we're going to be considered a guest. So, right? So we're going to have to send the user a message whenever they join the server. So in order for us to do that, we need to listen to the guild member add events. Okay, which pretty much is triggered when a guild member joins, or when a user joins a new guild, or I mean when a new user joins a guild. Okay, and the callback function, the handler for guild member add, it takes in the member object, which is the member that joined. Okay, so we can go ahead and directly send them a message. So we're gonna go ahead and say member.send. We're gonna use templates and tracks. We're gonna say hello member. Welcome to member.guild.name, and then we're going to say please visit. So we're going to have to generate this URL. Okay, so I'm going to explain how the URL works in just a sec. But basically, since we're on development mode, we're going to use localhost, but later on when we develop, we're going to change the URL to our actual domain, or the actual URL that we're going to host our service on. Okay, but for now we're going to do please visit localhost, and then we're going to reference the not port, we're going to do process.env.port, which is going to be 3000 for now, but we're going to change that later on before we deploy. Okay, so right now you're going to see please visit this, and if I leave the server and if I join, so let's leave it and let's join to make sure we have no errors. Okay, so let's join. You're gonna see right now it only says localhost. Okay, so I mentioned that we need to make sure that this URL is unique, okay? Because obviously, you don't want everyone mapping to the same URL, because we need a way to determine who actually visited the link, okay? And we need to make sure that we generate different tokens for each member. So we need to make sure that this URL is unique for everyone. Okay, so let's actually set up our Express server right now. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder, and this is going to be called server, and this is literally just going to store our server code right over here. Okay, the reason why I'm creating a new folder is because you obviously want to make sure it's separate from the bot. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to say const express equals require. We're going to import Express. Okay, that's the web framework that we're going to be using to set up our API server. And then we're going to say const app equals Express. Okay, so by calling Express, this is a tuple function. We're basically initializing our app, right? We're initializing Express and storing it in that variable app. So if I want to go ahead and do things like handle get requests on our server, I can do so by just doing app.get, and then we're going to pass in the callback function res, and then we can send a response back. So for example, if I do res.send hello, okay, when I access our domain with the home route, this just a / it's going to send back hello. Okay, so pretty much everything that we ever want to do with our Express server, we're going to be using this app variable. Okay, so now over here right now we're setting up a simple, let me zoom in, we're setting up a simple route, or a simple, simple home route. So whenever we access that home route, okay, we're going to be sending back a response, hello. Okay, that's pretty much how it works whenever you access, whenever you try to make any GET request, right? If you access some URL, you're basically making a GET request, okay? And whatever the server chooses to send back to you, they can send you a file, they can send you an image, they can send you HTML, text, JSON, whatever. Okay, so pretty much if you ever want to build your own API, chances are you'd probably want to use something like Express. Of course, there are different other frameworks out there or modules that you can use that are maybe more lightweight. So you can just look into those. Okay, so let me explain what this callback function is, because right now this .get function, we're taking in two parameters. Okay, we're taking in the first parameter is going to be the route. So in this case, we just have the home route. Okay, so it's going to look like localhost :3000/ and that's going to send this hello. And this second parameter is a function. It's a callback function, and that's the handler for this route. Okay, so everything that we want to do whenever the user accesses this route, we would do it inside this callback function. The first parameter is the request object. Okay, so the request object is pretty much going to contain information about like cookies, sessions, headers, and the headers are going to contain information about like any authorization tokens, and things like that, and the content type and a bunch of other stuff. Of course, you can look into it, but I'm just explaining what these two parameters are. Okay, so request object, and we also have the response object. The response object we're going to be using to send responses back to the user. So we're going to be using the response object to send them their token. Okay, but don't worry so much about it right now. I'm going to explain more as we actually work with it. Okay, but right now I'm just telling you guys what these two parameters are. Okay, so it's very, very, very straightforward. All right, so however, we're not going to handle any routes in our app.js file. We're actually going to make a new folder that's going to store our routes for us. Okay, but the main thing that I'm going to do in this app.js file is I'm going to go ahead and do module.exports, and I'm going to go ahead and export a function, because what I'm going to do is inside bot.js, I'm going to import this app.js file. Okay. And when the bot is ready, because I don't want my server to start up unless my bot is ready, okay? Because obviously if our bot isn't ready, like if our bot can't log in, it makes no sense to set up the web server, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say module.exports function. This is going to take in the ports. It's going to take in a port parameter, and we're going to go ahead. So we're going to go ahead and reference this app variable, because right now we've only initialized the Express application. We haven't actually started listening on a port for request. So we're gonna have to do app.listen, and this is going to be port, which is the port that we want to listen to requests on. And this is going to take in a callback function, but I'm just going to go ahead and do console log. Let's see, listening on port. Okay, cool. All right, and that's all that we're going to do for app.js for now. So I'm going to show you how to get this to work. So we're going to go ahead and say const. What do I want to call this? We'll call this actually no. I'm going to go into the ready. I'm going to go into this ready. The ready event, and we're going to require. And we're going to go into server app, and I'm going to go ahead and just invoke the function like that, because remember, this is a top-level function. Okay, module.exports is basically equal to function. Okay, so when you require this app.js module, you're basically getting this function in return. Okay, so we're basically kind of like importing a function. So we're going to pass in the port, so it's going to be process.env.port. Okay, right over here. Awesome. So now if I save, you're going to see in our console, we get test autobot has logged in. And then on the next line, we get listening on port 3000. Okay, so if I change the port to, let's say, 4000 or 5400, and if I save, it's going to say listening on port 5400. Okay, so let's get rid of this. Okay, so that's pretty much it. We have our web server set up right now. So if I save again, it's going to go back to 3000. So if I go to my URL, localhost 3000, you're going to see right now our server does work, but we cannot get because we don't have our routes set up. Okay, so let me just exit this, and we're going to go back here. So we're going to return back to this app.js file in just a bit. But what I want to do next is I want to set up a simple route for our users to access. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and actually create a new folder inside server. We're going to call this routes. Okay, so in Express, if you ever want to learn Express, I would highly recommend it. It's very, very powerful web framework, and it's really good for building backend services. Okay, but you obviously don't want to set up all of your routes inside just your app.js file, because of course we could typically do something like this. We could do app.gets. We could do something like home, and I can send the request back. So whenever they visit the home URL, we can say res.send home, and if I go to my Chrome, I can reference that route by saying home, and it's going to say home, right? And I can also set up another route. I can say app.get user, okay? And this user route could typically, do whatever you want, but of course, the ideal situation is when you're building an API, these routes should, they're pretty much like different endpoints, right? So different routes should handle different things. Okay, so for example, the home route should probably render a web page that that takes them to the home page. The user's route could pretty much be something like it can give them information about the user, for example. So if I go over to user, you're going to see it's going to say user. So we have different routes, and of course different routes will give us different things. So if I go back to home, it's going to go back to literally the home routes and etc. But of course you don't want to put everything in the app.js file. You want to divide it into different routes. Okay, so since we're going to have a route for just authorization, we're going to go ahead and create a file called auth.js. Okay, and we're going to handle all of our routes for auth inside here. Realistically, it's just only going to be one route, but we're going to take in what's called parameters. They're called route parameters. Okay, route parameters express. And these route parameters are going to be parameters that we're going to pass into the URL. Okay, and I'll explain why we're going to need them. Okay, so but first, let's go ahead and set up a router. So we're going to go ahead and say const router equals. Okay, because since we're using routing in Express, we want to make sure we have a router set up. So I'm going to go ahead and do require express dot router, and this we're gonna call the constructor of that. Okay, so now that we have a router, the next thing we want to make sure we're doing is we're module.export. So we're going to export the router, so that way we can actually register our router. So I'm going to put this inside curly braces because we are going to need to export an event emitter later on. Okay, so in our app.js file, we're going to go ahead and register our auth.js route by saying const auth route equals require. We're going to go inside that routes folder and we're going to reference auth, and I'm going to call .router. Okay, and now I can go ahead and do app.use, and I'm going to say, okay, so for every endpoint inside auth.js in this route over here, I want it to be hit with the auth path first. Okay, so basically, if I register my route over here inside our router, we're going to say router.get. So I'm going to do just the slash for now, and we're going to send back a simple hello world. I'm going to go to that route auth. Whoops. Here we go. Yeah. So now notice how it says hello world. Okay. And if I go to slash, it's going to say cannot get because we don't have that handled over there. Right. So basically what I'm saying is, okay, we're going to use this route with this entire file over here. Okay. So for example, router.get slash, let's just say user. Okay. So if I want to reference this route, we're not going to do localhost slash user, so localhost port 3000 slash user. We need to do localhost port 3000 slash auth slash user. So that's kind of like a sub route. So now if I do slash user, that's going to get us user. Okay. And if I do this, it's going to say cannot get user because this user route is part of the auth route. Okay. So notice how, so pretty much obviously you want to set up routes that all correspond to auth. That would all go into this auth.js file over here. And if we have another route, let's say for example user.js, we can register something like app.use with user, and then user route, and then every single route that's going to be related to user will go inside that user route. So it's just a good way to divide your code into different and so like it's a good way to make sure that your code is consistent and it's cleaner. Okay, all right, cool. So now that we have our routes set up, what we want to do next is we want to go ahead and set up a function in our auth.js. Well, not a function, but we're gonna want to set up the route itself. Okay. So right now this slash get, in order to access this this route, we're gonna have to do localhost port 3000 slash auth. Okay. However, we're not done yet. We need to take in two route parameters. Okay. So if you want to take in a route parameter, so basically right now, right? Let me show you. Right now, this route over here is just slash auth, and it works, hello world, right? However, we want to make sure that each route is unique. For example, so we want to make sure that for each route, it corresponds to the specific user that joined or the specific user that accessed it, right? So the way we're going to detect it is we're going to basically take in two route parameters. The first route parameter is going to be the guild ID. Right, so it's going to be guild ID, and the second route parameter is going to be the user ID. Obviously, this is not going to work because we don't have it set up. So we're going to go ahead and do :guild, and we're going to do :user. Okay, so now if I save, if I refresh, you're going to see it says hello world, and we have two parameters. We have guild ID and user ID. Okay, and you're probably wondering, like, why would you want to use route parameters? Well, it's a good way to actually distinguish between different users on it's a good way to distinguish different users on your application. So I guess a good example would be, let's say if we go to github.com, right? I can go to github.com and I can go to my GitHub. So this route over here is going to correspond to my GitHub account, right? But let's say if I go to a different, let's see, Brad Traversy example. Right? I'm specifying a different route, right? In this case, the route parameter would be Brad Traversy, and this is going to take us to a different person's GitHub page. Right? And we can, of course, do something like Discord.js, and this is going to take us to the Discord.js organization. So hopefully that gives you guys an understanding on why we would want to use route parameters, okay? Because, of course, every route is going to correspond to a different, I guess, identity, if that makes sense, okay? So now that we have our route parameters set up, basically the route parameters are going to be the guild ID and the user ID. So we're going to go ahead and handle that by saying let guild ID equals rec. So if I want to reference the route parameters, we need to reference the request object. So we say rec.params, and it's going to be whatever we set it to over here. So for example, if it's guild, that's literally the name of the route parameter. So it's going to say .guild, and we're going to say let's user ID equals request.params.user. So if I console.log these two to the console, and if I reference this, let's go back here again, refresh, you're going to see guild ID, user ID. Okay, obviously, if I change it up a little bit, let's change it to this. You're going to see in the console, it's going to be whatever this is and whatever this is. Okay. All right, cool. All right, so we're not done yet. So what we need to do is we need to actually send them the URL. Now the problem here is like this. Okay, so if we actually just give them that link, that direct link to their guild ID and their member ID. So for example, so basically what I'm saying is our link is going to look something like this. So it's going to look something like, wait, not here. Let me close this file out because we're done with app.js. So our link is going to look something like this. We get member.guild.id, and then we're going to get member.id. Okay, so let's go ahead and, so we restarted. Let's go ahead and leave our Discord server. And let's go ahead and just rejoin again. So let me just go back up here, paste this down here. We're going to join. Okay, so notice how this is what our link is going to look like. The problem with this link is that anyone can actually access this link, right? So for example, if I know the guild ID and if I know the user ID, right, I can just paste that in here and I can access, I can access their route. Now, obviously, it's not like it's going to do anything because, if they're not on the server, it's not going to work, of course. And it's not like we're, giving out sensitive data, but this is actually bad security design. Like if you actually did this in a real application, anyone can access anyone's route, and that's bad. So what we're going to do is we're going to encrypt their guild ID and we're going to encrypt their member ID. Okay, and we're going to do that using the crypto module, which is part of Node.js. And it's pretty awesome. I'm not super familiar with it, but I do know how to use it to fit our needs. And that's exactly what we're going to do to encrypt their information. And then we're going to use that encrypted string in the URL. So it's going to look something like this up here. Okay, rather than just this, simple URL. Obviously this would work, but you want to add that extra layer of security by encrypting the URL. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a file called utils. I'm going to create a folder actually called utils. And I'm going to go ahead and create a file called util.js. So basically I want all of my functions to be wrapped inside this util.js folder. So we're going to go ahead and say const crypto equals require crypto. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and create a variable, declare a variable called algorithm. This is going to be the encryption algorithm that we're going to be using. So of course there are different types of encryption algorithms. There's I think it's SHA-1, there's MD5, there's AES, there's a whole bunch. I think HMAC is also another one. Again, I'm not too great with cryptography, but if you know a little bit about cryptography, you'll probably understand what I'm talking about, and you'll understand what exactly needs to get done. So basically, we're going to define an algorithm. I'm going to use AES 192 CBC because that's what they use on the documentation, and then we're going to go ahead and declare a password variable. Now this is going to be the password that we're going to be using to generate our key. Typically, you'd want this to be like a secret. So we're just going to say some secret key for now. Obviously, if you want to make it extra, you can go ahead and generate some other hash, have this be the password, and you can use that. But for now, we're just going to have this some secret key as our password. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and say module.exports.encrypt. This is just going to be a function that we're going to call later on, and the function is going to take in the parameter. It's going to take in the string to encrypt. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to get a key. Okay, because basically we're going to use that key along with the algorithm to create a cipher object, and that cipher object is what we're going to be using to actually encrypt the data. So we're going to say let key equals crypto. We're going to say script sync because we want it to be synchronous. So the first parameter is going to be a password, which is going to be this variable up here. The second parameter is going to be salt. So we're just going to put salt like that. And then we're going to do 24 for the key length. Of course, I'm just following the documentation because this is just a basic example, but obviously you'd want to modify it to your own needs. Okay, and we're going to do let iv equals buffer.alex. So this is going to create a buffer object, which is going to serve as the initialization vector. And I read a little bit about the initialization vector. It's pretty much used for, I guess, randomness. I don't know too much about it, but I just do know that this is an initialization vector, and it's pretty much a buffer object. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and create the cipher object. We're going to go ahead and say let cipher equals crypto.createCipher create cipher iv, because we're using the initialization vector. So we're going to pass in the algorithm, so that's going to be AES192 CBC. We're going to say we're going to pass the key, and we're going to pass in the iv. Right? Okay, so now that we have the cipher object, what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and call the update function on cipher. That's going to actually encrypt the data for us. So we're going to say let encrypted ID equals cipher the updates. We're going to pass in the string to encrypt. This is going to be the encoding. So since our string is UTF-8 format, we're going to do UTF-8. And the output is going to be, the output encoding is going to be hex. So you can either do hex, binary, or base 64. We'll just do hex for simplicity. And once we call update, we want to go ahead and reference that encrypted ID, and we're going to concatenate it with cipher.final, which is going to return any final, I guess, cipher data. And we're gonna do hex since our output is hex. And we're going to return encrypted ID. Okay, so let me actually, before I move on, we're going to go ahead and test this out. So let's do const util equals require. We're going to go into the utils folder like that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and say let encrypt equal util.encrypt. We're going to pass in the member.id, and we're going to go ahead and say console log encrypt and see what happens. So this should work. Let's see, test. So let's join the server. We're in the server right now. Let's go to this URL. Okay, there we go. We don't have it set up right now, but all we've done so far was we just encrypted the string. So you can see we have this value over here, and that's the, I think, the member ID. Yep, that's the member ID encrypted. Of course, it's going to be the same thing every single time. And I think the reason why is because of the password. So obviously, maybe if you wanted to, so maybe later on, if you want to make sure it's randomized, you can probably change the password every single time. Or I think maybe you can change the salt, actually. And so I think it's this, actually, I think it's a salt that we need to, that we don't want to change. So I think if we do salt 2, and if let me just leave and join again. So let's leave and let's join. You're going to see it's going to be a different hash string. So of course you can just create a function that's going to generate a random salt, but we're just going to leave it alone for now. Okay. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and write the decrypt function, because basically we're going to need to encrypt and we're also going to decrypt. Okay, so let's go ahead and say module.exports.decrypt. Okay, and the reason why we need to use two functions is because basically we're going to encrypt the IDs inside this event over here, and then we're going to generate that random URL for them with the encrypted ID, with the encrypted guild ID and the encrypted member ID. Okay, so I'm actually going to move that stuff right over here. Let's just call this member ID, and let's go ahead and do let guild ID equals util dot encrypt member.guild.id. So we're going to replace member.guild.id with just guild ID, because that's the encrypted value, and then same thing with member ID over here. Okay, so now that we've encrypted it, once they access this route, we're going to have to decrypt it in our web server. Okay, the reason why we need to decrypt it is we want to make sure that we know who is actually referencing our server, our endpoint. Okay, so we're gonna have to decrypt that in auth.js. So let's just go ahead and write the decrypt function real quick. It's realistically just almost the same thing, just that it's literally just the reverse operation. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually just going to copy these two, paste that in here. because we're using the same key, the same initialization vector. The only difference is that this time we're going to create a decipher object instead of instead of a cipher. So decipher IV, same algorithm, of course, same key and same IV. Okay, and then we're gonna go ahead and say let decrypted is equal to decipher dot update the string to decrypt. So this time the input encoding is hex because we're reading in a hex string, and the output is going to be UTF-8. So it's basically just the reverse operation. And then likewise, we have to say decrypted. We have to call dot final. So we're gonna say decrypted dot final. Wait, no, it's decipher. I'm sorry, decipher dot final. And then we're gonna return decrypted like this. Okay, so let's go ahead into our backend server auth.js, because we're pretty much done with these two functions over here. We just need to decrypt the information in auth.js. Okay, so to do that, what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually create a middleware function. Okay, so over here we're gonna create a function called function validate, and this function is going to take in 3 parameters. It's going to take in rec, which is the request object. It's going to take in res, which is the response object, and it's going to take in next. Okay, so pretty much, again, this is all part of Express. Okay, but again, if you don't know Express, I'm going to try my best to explain it, but this is going to be useful in the future if you ever want to work with Express to build your own APIs. Okay, so pretty much a middleware is pretty much like it's like a middle ground layer between 2 applications, and that middleware is going to be invoked to do some validation. So the whole validation that we want to do is we want to make sure that the URL that they're accessing is a valid URL, right? Because obviously right now the only way right now they can obviously enter whatever they want. So what we're going to do in the validate function is we're going to decrypt both the parameters, right? Because right now the guild parameter and the user parameter, those are going to be hashed values or encrypted values. Okay, so even if they tried to access the routes with some user ID, like this, like just some plain user ID with a guild ID, and if we try to decrypt it, it's actually going to give us, it's going to throw an error. Okay, and I'll show you how that works in just a sec. The first thing we're going to do in this validate function is we're going to say let guild ID equals rec.params.guild. Okay, because basically we're going to pass in validate as a parameter inside this .get function. Okay, so when we access this guild, when we access this route over here, it's going to first handle this function over here, and we can basically do whatever we want. Okay, we're going to validate both the guild ID as well as the user ID. So I'm going to get the param as well by saying user. Okay, and that's of course referencing the route parameter over here. Okay, and what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and say, we're going to go ahead and do this. We're going to say try, because this might throw an exception, because if you pass in an invalid string when we decrypt, it's going to throw an exception. So we're going to go and say let's call it decrypted guild ID equals. So we're going to go ahead and invoke this decrypted function from util.js. So we're going to go and say const utils or require. We're going to go into, let's see, utils/util, and we're going to say util.decrypt, and we're going to pass in guild ID, and we're going to say let decrypted user ID equals util.decrypt user ID. So if either one of these throws an exception, we're going to just catch it right over here. So we're just going to catch error. So I'm going to console.log the error for you just to show you what it's going to look like. So what I'm going to do is, let's go back here. So right now, hold on. Yeah, you can already see wrong final block length, right? So actually, let me go ahead and just generate another URL. So let's leave this server. Hold on, let me save it again. Okay, so we're restarting. So we're going to join our server. So we're going to get that encrypted URL right over here. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to go ahead and paste that here. Okay, so right now it's going to say cannot get, but let's look at the console. Okay, right now the console is not throwing in any error because it's valid. Okay, but watch this. If I try to do something like this, like that, let's see what happens. Wait a minute. That should have not. I should have thrown an error. Hold on. Did I save? Okay, let's try this again. Let's see. Just want to make sure we turn decrypt. Hold on. That should work. That should throw an error. But okay, so we're decrypting that. Okay. And any errors we're to catch. Okay, so let me actually try this. Let's do console.log decrypted console.log decrypted user ID. Okay, let's save this again. We're gonna access this route. Huh. Wait, that's strange. Okay, so please visit this. Okay, so we have the port, guild ID, member ID. Okay, that's fine. I think maybe it's because we need to actually send something back. So I'm gonna call next, and let's go ahead and do res.send hello. Let's see what happens here. Hold on. Oh wait. Oh, I'm sorry. It's supposed to be auth. Oh my god, I'm an idiot. Can't believe I forgot that. Okay. Yeah, it's supposed to be auth. Okay, there we go. Now that makes sense. Okay. So watch this. So I'm going to go ahead and type /auth, because remember, that's valid route. Okay. So now you're going to see that we have an error. Wrong final block length. Okay. However, if I go to this URL over here, I need to add auth in front of it. It's going to be valid. So let's do auth. See how it says hello? Because it's a valid. See, and it decrypts to the guild ID, and it decrypts, and so the guild hash is going to decrypt to the guild ID, and the members hash is going to decrypt back to the member ID, just like that. Okay, so now that we know that that works. Okay, so basically, like I said earlier, what we're going to do is we're going to decrypt the guild ID, and we're going to decrypt the user ID, and if either one of these throws an exception, which means that it's an invalid string, okay, we're going to just send the message back. So we're just going to say res.send. We're going to say, let's see, error. We're just going to say invalid URL, because we don't want to say anything about the encryption thing. We're just going to say invalid URL. Okay, so watch this. If I go ahead, if I try to do this, invalid URL. Okay, because obviously these are not valid IDs. Okay, so it's going to throw an error. All right, cool. And if these are valid, if these are valid guild IDs, or if it's a valid guild ID and a valid user ID, what we're going to do is we're going to call next. Okay, so next is a function which basically says, okay, we're passing this middleware function over here. We're going to validate everything. If it's valid, we're going to call next. So next is going to continue back to this function over here. Okay, so it's kind of like this. So if there's an error, we're going to stop the request over here, and we're just going to send an invalid URL. So this is never going to go back to this callback function over here. Okay, notice it's like it's like that extra layer of validation, basically. Okay, but if they pass the validate function, then what we're going to do is we're just going to continue on with our process, and we're just going to go back to this callback function over here. Okay, but before I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say rec, and I'm going to say guild ID equals decrypted guild ID. So I'm basically taking the request object and I'm attaching two properties on there. So we're going to say user ID equals decrypted user ID. Okay, and we're going to call next. So now I can reference those properties. So instead of referencing the encrypted parameters, because right now rec.params.guild is the encrypted string, I can actually just get the decrypted string by saying console.log rec.guild, or its guild ID, and I can say console.log rec.user ID. Okay, so let me go ahead and show you again. So let me go ahead. So remember, this URL is still valid. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and say, oh, it has to be auth / okay, hello. and see how we're logging these two IDs inside over here on line 20. Okay. All right. So of course, this whole thing is going to be a little bit, confusing if you don't know Express. But like I said, if you want, definitely check out Express. I highly recommend it because it's a really good module to work around with. Okay. Whoops. Hold on. Okay. So now, what we're gonna do is we need to. Okay. So now that we have ensured that their IDs are valid, what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and send them a token. So we're going to generate a random hash token for them. Okay. But we also want to keep track of the users that are on this URL. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable. We're going to call this const users equals new map. This is going to be a map. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're basically going to say, okay, so when they access this URL, we're gonna do a check. We're gonna say if the user's map, if it has their encrypted, well, not their encrypted actually. Wait a minute. If it has their user ID, okay. Actually, I think instead, okay. So yeah, if it has their user ID, then what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and say res.send. We're going to send them a random token. Well, actually, no. Instead of user ID, we're going to go ahead and do we're going to do rec.guild ID. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say let unique equal rec.guild ID plus rec.user ID. Okay, because obviously they could join two new guilds at the same. So think of it. I'm thinking about the case like this. Let's say if they join two guilds at the same time with and those two guilds have this authorization bot, for example, right? You don't want to check the user ID, right? Because obviously it's going to say yes, because that user ID is not really going to be unique, if that makes sense, because they're in two guilds. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to take the guild ID, right? The decrypted guild ID, so the actual guild ID, not the encrypted one, the decrypted one. So the actual guild ID. We're going to sum up the guild ID with the user ID, and that's going to get us a unique value. Okay, because every guild ID is unique and every single user ID is unique. So if you add two unique values together, it's always going to be unique. Okay, unless there's some kind of an overflow. So if users has unique, okay, we're just going to send them the ID that's inside the map. Okay, so we're going to say token users.get unique. Okay. Otherwise, let me actually move this up here. Else, we're going to go ahead and generate a new token for them, and we're going to store their token and their ID inside the map. Because this is going to prevent us from generating new tokens every single time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set the util function. I'm going to create another function called, the util file. I'm going to create another function called generate hash, and this is just going to be a one-line function or one-line code. And all we're doing over here is we're just generating a random hexadecimal string. So we're going to do return crypto.random bytes. We'll just do 20. We're going to call toString and encoding as hex. Okay. All right. And the entire string is going to be a hexadecimal value. So we're done with that. So now I can go ahead and do let hash equals util.generate hash. Okay, and if I console.log that hash, you're going to see it's going to be some random hexadecimal string. Okay, and what we want to do next is we want to go ahead and say users.set unique, set the hash as the value to that unique key. And we're going to go ahead and say res.send token, and we're going to go ahead and say hash. Okay. All right, cool. So let's try this out right now. So let's go back to this URL. We're going to get this token. And notice how now if I refresh the page, it's going to be a different token each time. And that's because we're checking to see if their unique ID is inside the map. Okay, so if I actually, let me actually console.log unique. Okay, and if I refresh, you're going to see that this is going to be this part over here, that's the guild ID concatenated with the member ID. It's going to be unique every single time. It's pretty good. Okay, awesome. Now now that we've done this, okay, so now that we have the token, we need a way for the user to actually paste that token inside the text, inside the DM channel of the bot. However, how do we know if the user actually visits the URL? Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually use an event emitter. So when the user visits this URL, as soon as they make a request to this URL, we're going to emit an event, and that event we're going to listen to it inside the bot.js file over here. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do const, and I'm going to call this authenticate. Whoops, and we're going to go ahead and say require, or I'm sorry, we're going to do hold on, events. Hold on, wait. First, we need to import EventEmitters. So we're going to say const event emitter. So we need to import EventEmitter by saying const EventEmitter and require events, because EventEmitter is a class inside the events module. And I'm going to say const authenticate equals new EventEmitter, like that. So we're creating an instance of the EventEmitter class. Okay, so now I can export that authenticate object, which is an instance of the EventEmitter. Okay, because we want to make sure we're using the same instance across between our bot.js file and our auth.js file. If you go inside the bot.js file and if you create a new instance of EventEmitter, it's not going to work, okay, because it's a different instance. Okay, so every single event that I emit inside this file is going to be listened to bot.js, because we're going to be referencing this authenticate object. And every single event that we want to emit from bot.js to auth.js is going to be handled inside here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and inside the else block, okay, so the else block basically says that this is their first time visiting this link. If they visited this, if it goes into the if case first, that means they have already visited the page already. Okay, and we don't want to emit the event again because it's going to spam. It's going to basically, what we want to do is we want to emit the event. And once that, we're going to listen to the event inside the guild member add. Okay, we're not guild member. We're going to listen to the event inside this bot.js file. And once the event actually emits, we're going to send them a message. We're going to tell them to enter the code that they received. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and say authenticate.emit. We're going to call this visited because all they've done so far was they visited the URL. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, we're going to pass in parameters. So we're going to pass in the hash. So that's their token. We're going to pass in the guild ID as well as the user ID. So I think I'm going to do rec.guild ID. So this is the actual guild ID and the actual user ID, not the encrypted one. Because at this point we know that they are who they say they are. Like they're the actual, user. So we don't have to pass in the encrypted values. Okay. All right. So this is pretty much going to allow us to keep track of who is actually, authenticate, who's actually visiting this URL. Okay. So I'm going to emit this event over here, and inside bot.js, I'm going to have to get this authenticate event emitter, or the authenticate object. So I'm going to go ahead and say const. I'm going to call this, what do I want to call it? I want to be consistent. So I'm going to call it authenticate. So I'm going to say const authenticate. And I'm going to say require. We're going to require that util, not the util. We're going to require that auth route. So we're going to say const server /routes/auth. Okay, so this is going to get us the authenticate object. So I can go and say authenticate on visited and pass in those 3 parameters like that. And watch this. So let's go and say const. Let's log the hash. Let's log the guild ID, and let's log the user ID. And let's go ahead and take a look at what's going to happen. So if I visit this URL right now, you're going to see over here, all 3 of those parameters were logged to the console, which basically means that we visit the page. Let me actually delete the rest of these console logs because I know it's probably going to confuse you guys a little bit. Okay, so where else over here? Okay, so let's visit this page again. Let's refresh. Okay, there we go. And over here, all three of these parameters were logged inside this authenticate.on, this visited handler over here. Okay, basically, once we visit this page, it's going to emit this event is going to emit visited, and we're going to pass in 3 parameters, and that is going to go all the way to here, and we're just going to do all of our stuff over here. So inside the handler for visited, we're going to have to do a couple things. We're going to have to send the user that has visited the page. We're going to tell them to enter the code that they received. Okay, so the first thing we want to do though is we want to make sure that the guild ID is valid. I mean, it is valid, but we want to make sure that we have to double check. Okay, because we do need to send the message to the member, and in order to get the member object, because right now we have no reference to the member object whatsoever. Okay, because right now we're coming from the auth.js, where we're basically emitting the event from here. Okay, which is why we need to make sure we pass in the guild ID and the user ID, so that way we can actually fetch those values. So we're gonna say let guild equal client.guilds, and we're gonna go ahead and call get, because client.guilds is a collection, and that collection is all of the guilds mapped by their ID. So if we pass in guild ID, this should give us the actual guild object, and we're gonna verify that right over here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna say let member, and I'm gonna use a ternary operator, so I don't have to do a bunch of if statements. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say, okay, guild. So if guild is a truthy value, which means that this is an actual instance of the guild. So if you call .get on the guild ID, and if the guild ID is not if it's invalid key, it's going to return, I think, null, okay? So, and null is a falsy value. Okay, so basically if guild, then we're gonna go ahead and do guild.members.get. So now we're basically saying, okay, guild is the guild object itself. We're gonna reference the members property, which is a collection of all the members inside the guild. And since members is also a collection, we can call .get, and we're gonna pass in user ID. Right now, if guild is a falsy value, so if it's undefined or null or just false in general, then we're going to just do null. So then I can go ahead and I can say if member, we can do all of our stuff. Because basically, the reason why I'm doing this is so I don't have to do something like this. So I don't have to do if guild, then we can go ahead and say, let member, blah, 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 and then if guild. So we're going to have to, so preventing from having a nested if else statement, we can just do one if statement like that. Okay, which is a little bit more advanced, but not really, but it's a lot more cleaner in my opinion. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to go ahead and prompt them for the code. So we're going to go ahead and say, we're gonna go ahead and send them a message. So we're gonna go ahead and say member.send, please enter the code you received. Okay, now here's the thing. Since we're prompting them for a message, or for like a message, we need to await messages. In order for us to await messages, we need access to the channel. The problem is we don't have access to the channel, right? Because the member object doesn't have a channel property. Okay, well the user object does, I think. Actually, I think the user object does. It should have. Let me just check the documentation real quick, just to verify. User.dm channel. Yeah, there we go. Okay, and we can actually do, I think, yeah, because I know in the previous implementation, what I did was actually, I think instead we could do let user equal client.fetch user by their user ID. Okay, I think we could do that instead. And then, this is actually, yeah, let me actually try this real quick. So if user, we're gonna do user.send, please enter the code you receive, and then we're gonna user. Okay, let's actually try this real quick. So user.send is gonna send them the DM. Okay, awesome. Let's actually try this out real quick. So we're gonna go over to, let's see. So we need to leave the server, and we need to rejoin. So we're going to visit the URL. Okay, and it's gonna say, okay, so it didn't send the message. User.send is not a function, so client, oh, it's client.users. No, it's, wait. Client.fetch. Hold on. Oh wait, you know why? It's because I just realized because fetch user is a promise. It returns a promise. So we're gonna go ahead and say client.users. I think actually instead though we can actually just get the user by their ID because they are already in. They are handled by the client, so we don't actually have to fetch because fetch will actually take a little bit longer. So let's try this again. So let's leave the server again, and let's go ahead and join. And let's visit the URL. We get the token. Please enter the code you received. Awesome. Okay, awesome. So that's good. So we don't have to fetch. Okay, that's good. And this actually makes much more sense. Okay, so please enter the code you received. Okay, so now we need them to enter the code. So we need to actually await messages. So basically we can do user.dm channel. So we reference the DM channel property. This is going to represent the channel between the user and the bot. Okay, and since we need to await messages, we need the user to send a message. We're going to do .await messages, and over here we're basically going to expect them to send a message back with the valid token. So await messages takes in two properties. It takes in a filter function and some options. So let's go ahead and define the filter. So let's say let filter equals m. So m is the message object that the user has sent. That's basically going to be passed into this filter function every single time. And we're going to check to make sure that the author is equal to the user ID. We want to make sure that the person sending the message is the same person. I mean, typically, they're going to be in the DM channel anyways, so this would really only ignore bot messages. And we're also going to make sure that the content of the string that they're sending is equal to the hash. And if it's not going to process it. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I think I'm going to use, let's see. I'm going to use async await. So we're going to do async, and I'm going to go ahead and say let's do let user message equal await, and we're going to pass in that filter function, and we're going to do max 1 for the await message options. So we're only ever going to take one message, okay, and this is going to return a collection because we're awaiting the await messages function. So we're going to get the collection in return. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this inside a parentheses, and I'm going to call .first on the collection. So that's going to get us the first message. And I can do that because the collection is always going to be size 1 no matter what. And then content. So that's going to get us the actual content. So the thing that they entered, okay? And of course, this user message is always going to be equal to the hash because that's what we have for our filter function. So we can go ahead and say, let's see. I'm just going to go ahead and say if user message, we're going to go ahead and do, well, I'm going to add the extra, I'm going to do if user message, then we're going to go ahead and say, user.send, you are now authorized. Okay, you're now authorized. And what we need to do next is we need to add them to the role. So I think that's why I actually originally had the member object was, because we need to add them to the role. Because you can't add a user to a role, you need to add the member to the role. And yes, there's a difference between a user and a member. So just remember that. Okay, so we need to actually get the member object. So I think we actually need to get the user regardless. So we're going to go ahead and, because I don't think you can directly reference, the user does not have the member property. Okay, that's fine. So I think what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and say let guild equals client.guilds.get guild ID, and we're going to say let member guild. I think we kind of need, we kind of do need what we had originally. So if guild, then we're going to say guild.members.get user ID else null, and then if member. So I think we can't use user actually. I mean, we still can to get the to do the DM channel, because otherwise what I would have done was I would have just awaited the message like this, and I would have done message.channel, and that would have been the DM channel. So let me just do that real quick. So I could have just done await message.channel.await messages like that. Okay, and if member, okay, so if user not authorized, member.add role, and we're gonna have to get the ID of our role. So I'm gonna go to test, and I'm gonna go to server settings, and we're gonna go ahead and grab the ID of the member role. So I'm gonna do add role, and I'm gonna go ahead and just let's see, I'm gonna await, and we'll just catch any errors, and that would only throw an exception if the role didn't exist or if the bot didn't have permissions. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's see, please enter the code received. Okay, let's try this out right now. So I'm gonna leave the server, and I'm gonna go ahead and join again. So we're gonna visit this URL, and if I refresh, it's gonna be the same token every single time. Oh wait, why did it not send the DM? User is not defined. Oh wait, yeah, I'm sorry. It's supposed to be member.send. Yeah, there we go. So let's leave again. Let's join. Visit the URL. Okay, so now that I've visited, it's gonna send me another DM. Please enter the code you received. So if I type random stuff, it's not gonna work, right? Wait, what am I doing here? Oh wait, I forgot to change the. It's supposed to be member.id. All right, let's try that again. That was an epic fail. Okay, so let's join again. We're gonna get the DM. We're gonna visit the page. Okay, if I refresh again, it's gonna give us the same token all the time, and it's not going to spam the DM to us. Okay. If I enter, what's wrong now? User is not defined. Okay, where do I have a user defined? Oh my god, I can't believe I keep forgetting about that. Okay. Let's leave the server. Let's join. And let's visit the URL. Let's get the token. So if I type random stuff, right? Okay, good. No errors. Okay, perfect. Obviously, right now, it's not going to say anything, but if I enter the right token, you are now authorized. And it's going to give us the role, and we have access to all of the channels. Okay, now the problem here is that, so here's the thing. Now that we're authorized, what we need to actually do is we need to actually emit another event. The reason why is because we're still going to be able to access that URL. And what I want to do is I want to actually delete the user from the map over here. Okay, because remember, because if you don't actually remove them from the map, I just have a feeling that you're gonna have a bunch of old users that are already authorized already, and it doesn't make sense to keep them inside that map data structure. So we're just gonna remove them. So I'm gonna go ahead and emit another event. So I'm gonna say you are now authorized, and we're gonna go ahead and do authenticates, and we're gonna go ahead and do emit authorized. So I'm gonna emit one event from here, and I'm gonna go ahead and pass in the member object as well as the user ID. Okay, so now if I go inside auth.js, I can listen to that event by saying authenticate on authorized, and we're gonna take in two parameters, member and user ID. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and do whatever we want. So typically in web applications, you'd want to save a user to a database once they, register for your account, or once they're authorized, you want to like save their sessions to a database and whatnot. For you can do whatever you want. Once they're authorized, you can save their information to a database. So for example, we can do something like we can just say saving member.user.username to database. Whoops. Hold on. To database. Okay, and we're gonna go ahead and say we're gonna delete the user ID from the map. So we're gonna go ahead and say let unique equal member ID plus user ID, and we're gonna say users.delete unique, and that should clear that from the map. And yeah, let's go ahead and try this one more time. So let's leave the server. Let's go ahead and join. We're going to get the DM. We're going to visit the URL and enter the code that you received. You're now authorized, and Cannot read username of undefined. Member.user.username. Wait a minute, that should be right. Member, we're passing in the member object right over here. Hold on, guild member dot user dot username. I don't know why that's undefined though. That's really strange. That is very strange. Member, or wait a minute. Okay, so we have the member object here. I think it might be this parentheses. That shouldn't be the case though, but let's see. Okay. It may have passed in differently, that's why. But this should be fine right now. Let's join. Go over here. Refresh, gonna give it the same token. Authorized and saving style to database, and you're gonna see that. Okay, there we go. I don't know why. Yeah, I think it was because I had the parenthesis around there. But this should be removed from the map though. Hold on. Unique. How am I saving them? Oh, it's guild ID. I always mess this part up. It's supposed to be. Oh wait, that doesn't make sense. It's supposed to be member.guild.id. User ID. There we go. Okay, so now. Let me restart this again. And let's try this one more time. So let's leave the server. Okay. And let's go ahead and join. Let's take that token. And wait, did I? Hold on. Oh wait, I didn't join the server. What am I doing? I only exited. Okay, let's join. Let's get this URL. Just paste it here. We got the token. We got the message. If I type random stuff, it's not gonna work. Type that. Bam, you're not authorized, and we're removed from the map on the back end. And you're gonna see we have access to all the channels. And of course, right now, if I even mess up one little thing of the token, it's gonna say invalid URL because it is an invalid URL. Okay. And of course, obviously, we are still going to be able to access the original URL, but you can also just write something to kind of like make it so that they can't access it. But I'm not going to do that in this video, obviously. But and like I said, even if we tried to pass in the guild ID and the member ID, it's not going to work. Okay, because it needs to pass in that encrypted value for the route parameters. All right. And that's pretty much it for, I guess that's pretty much it for this process, really. Again, of course, you can do whatever you want inside the authorized handler. We can save them to the database. We can, do whatever we want, basically. All right, and of course, yeah, this was a little bit more advanced. It took like a whole hour, over an hour, to kind of go over it, but hopefully it made sense. I tried my best to explain everything that I could. Obviously, there were a lot of mistakes that we made on the long run, but that's just part of coding. Like, there's a bunch of errors regardless. But yeah. So if you guys thought this was useful, definitely leave a comment down below. Definitely join my Discord server, and ask questions and whatnot if you need help with programming. And I will see you guys in my next video. Peace.